I want to show you how best practice recommendations work. So for the most part, best practice recommendations are indicated by the colors on these rulers. So a green means that that is within the best practice, yellow means it's borderline, and a red means it's not in best practice. So for example, if I click on this 10-foot vehicle lane here and I change it into a 12-foot lane, it makes the lane red to suggest that a 12-foot lane is not a good practice for the type of street I'm designing. The default street is a walkable boulevard, so that's why it's red in this case. But you can describe your own context, and so say for example if you were designing a freeway or a high-speed arterial, a 12-foot lane would be a green because that's a good size. So the best practice guidance that Street Plan follows are taken directly from this document published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers and the Congress for New Urbanism, Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, a Context-Sensitive Approach. And within that document is a vast array of guidance. So here is one of them. It talks about transects, how moving from C1, C2 as you get more and more urban, and there's different recommendations for the nature of the urban context. There are a lot of guidance for high-speed boulevards, low-speed boulevards, all kinds of things like that. There are tables such as this that make recommendations on lane width and width of parallel parking stalls, design speed, number of lanes, overall width of the roadside area based on your suburban, urban, or urban core context, residential or commercial, boulevard or avenue. So a huge array of recommendations. There are angle parking recommendations. It describes different elements of the roadside, such as an edge zone, a furnishing zone, throughway zone, and a frontage zone, and also makes best practice recommendations for those based on the different contexts. So Street Plan automatically incorporates all of those tables and recommendations. Just all you need to do is tell us what is the context you're aiming for. And so back to here in the urban form context, what you do is you just tell us what the urban form is. If you scroll over these, it'll give you some visual indicators of the types of things you might see that are typical of that context. So let's say I've got a urban village, and next it says okay, it's an urban village. What's the dominant type of use within along this street within your urban village? I'm going to say maybe it's a mixed use. Now it's going to ask for the nature of the roadway network within the general vicinity. So is it a traditional grid? Is it a loose urban grid? All these different grid types, so we'll say it's that. And now it asks for the nature of the roadway that you're trying to design. Are you aiming for a local street? It also, if you hover over these, it'll show different types. So back to the overview. Local street, and tells you some of the typical parameters of these kinds of streets. So let's say we're going to develop a boulevard. Okay, it says okay, there are two types of functional classes for boulevards: principal arterials and minor arterials. Principals usually have to carry a little more traffic than minors do. Now it asks you if you know what your average weekday traffic is for this street. And if you don't really know, you can choose some ranges, and this describes the experience at different ranges, or you can manually just enter it and say I think that my traffic is going to be 35,000 vehicles per day in 2040. Okay, now it's finished. It gives you a summation of everything you've mentioned. You can see here our Excel spreadsheet that follows all of those recommendations, so it has a row for every possible condition. So rural, avenue, minor arterial. It says, okay, if that's the nature of the context, then there's a setback recommendation, a speed recommendation, a lane width recommendation. It goes all the way down for all kinds of contexts: suburban, suburban industrial, urban village, or mixed use. So we're aiming for an urban center walkable boulevard, a minor arterial, and so all of the colors are aimed at that. So a 12-foot lane, it says, is too wide. If I reduce that down to 11, it should turn green, but it's also green at 10. If I change it to 9, it turns yellow, and if I change it to 8, it turns red. So it says, yeah, if you really have to, you could do a 9-foot lane. We don't recommend it, but an 8-foot lane, no way. You're just really not going to make it work on 8 feet. Bike lane, it says 6-foot bike lane is a good size. This green under this area indicates the speed limit, that's a good speed limit for this road. If I change it to 40, then it's yellow, and if I change it to 45, it says red. You're really not going to achieve a walkable boulevard if you have a speed limit of 45 miles an hour. So now let's look at the roadside. These elements that make up kind of the furniture zone, there are multiple elements, and it doesn't know how to rank those, but if you label those all together as part of the buffer, it says, oh, okay, a 7.5-foot buffer is a good size buffer for a road like this. And if we change that, so let's say we downsize, it will say that the overall size of the buffer is very inadequate, but the walkway itself is an adequate walkway. And on the whole, the overall amount of space on the roadside is okay, but not the greatest. Here it has green bars under the travel lanes. What that means is that 2 travel lanes each direction are ideal for this circumstance. So that should be enough to help you get started defining your own context and understanding what the best practice recommendations mean.